who, a billionaire, was driving his fiancée home when he saw his ex crossing the street with twins strapped to her chest. Welcome to Secrets Narrated. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. When the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 and share what you felt along the way. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with twists and hidden truths, make sure to follow Secrets Narrated so you don't miss the next one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy every detail. Ethan Rowe adjusted his cufflinks as his midnight blue Bentley glided through the crowded streets of downtown Chicago. The afternoon sun bounced off the glass towers along Michigan Avenue, casting sharp reflections across the leather interior. Beside him sat Natalie Brooks, 28 years old, honey blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, scrolling through wedding venues on her phone like she was browsing a dinner menu. "Lake Como or Napa?" she asked, not looking up. "I'm leaning Napa. It's closer for my parents." Ethan nodded without really hearing her. At 39, he had built a life that ran like clockwork. His real estate empire stretched across 12 states. His penthouse overlooked the Chicago skyline. His fiancée was beautiful, agreeable, and blissfully uncomplicated. This was the life he had chosen. Clean, controlled, comfortable. The traffic light ahead turned red. Ethan brought the car to a smooth stop at the intersection of Michigan and Erie, right in the heart of the Magnificent Mile. Shoppers moved in waves along the sidewalks. Tourists snapped photos of the Wrigley Building in the distance. And then she appeared. A woman stepped off the curb into the crosswalk. She wore a camel-colored coat, elegant but understated. Her dark skin glowed under the afternoon light. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and strapped to her chest, nestled in a grey twin carrier, were 2 sleeping infants. 2 babies, matching grey onesies. Tiny knitted hats with little ears on top. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He knew that face. He knew those eyes. Claire Monroe, the woman he had walked away from 2 years ago. The woman who had asked him for more time, more commitment, more future. And he had told her no. He had told her clearly, honestly, that he didn't want children. That his legacy would be built in boardrooms, not nurseries. That fatherhood wasn't part of his plan. She had cried. He had left anyway. Now she was walking past his windshield with 2 infants pressed against her heart. "Ethan?" Natalie's voice cut through the fog. "The light's green." He didn't move. Claire's gaze swept across the intersection. For one impossible second, her eyes met his through the tinted glass. Her expression didn't change. She simply looked away and kept walking, disappearing into the crowd on the other side of the street. The car behind them honked. "Ethan?" Natalie repeated, concern creeping into her voice. "Are you okay?" He pressed the gas pedal, his hands trembling slightly against the steering wheel. "I'm fine," he said. But the math was already running through his head. 2 babies, twins, born sometime in the last year. Which meant they were conceived right around the time he and Claire had ended things, which meant... No. It couldn't be. 3 hours earlier, Ethan Rowe had stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 62nd floor of the Rowe Tower, watching Chicago sprawl beneath him like a kingdom awaiting orders. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, a neatly trimmed beard framing a strong jaw, steel-grey eyes that had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit tailored to perfection, a platinum Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, and the quiet confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. At 39, Ethan had everything society told him to want. A real estate portfolio worth $3.2 billion, properties in Manhattan, Miami, Los Angeles, and London. A private jet that could have him on any continent within 12 hours. A penthouse that magazines begged to feature. And a fiancée who looked like she belonged on the cover of Vogue. Natalie Brooks had entered his life 8 months ago at a charity gala in the Gold Coast. She was the daughter of a Connecticut senator, educated at Yale, polished in all the ways that mattered in his world. She didn't ask difficult questions. She didn't demand emotional availability. She simply fit, like a beautiful accessory that complemented his lifestyle without disrupting it. Their engagement had been announced in the Tribune 2 months ago. The wedding was scheduled for June at a vineyard in Napa Valley. 400 guests. A reception that would cost more than most people's homes. Everything perfectly planned, perfectly controlled, perfectly predictable. Just the way Ethan liked it. His assistant, Marcus, knocked twice before entering. "Your 2 o'clock is here, Mr. Rowe. The developers from Austin." "Send them in." The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Ethan listened to their pitch about a mixed-use development near the University of Texas campus, asked precisely the right questions, and agreed to a preliminary investment of $40 million. The developers left looking like they had won the lottery. Ethan felt nothing. This was the rhythm of his days, meetings that moved millions, decisions that shaped skylines, power that most people couldn't comprehend. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, a quiet numbness had settled into his bones like frost. He told himself it was maturity, contentment, the natural result of having achieved everything he set out to achieve. But sometimes, late at night, when the penthouse was silent and Natalie was asleep beside him, Ethan stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was all there was. He never let himself wonder for long. By 4 o'clock, he was in the Bentley, pulling up to Natalie's apartment building on Lakeshore Drive. She emerged looking effortlessly beautiful in a cream silk blouse and tailored navy pants, her Louis Vuitton bag slung over one shoulder. "Hey, handsome," she said, sliding into the passenger seat and leaning over to kiss his cheek. "Ready for dinner?" "Always." She pulled out her phone immediately, resuming whatever conversation she had been having via text. Ethan didn't mind. Their relationship worked precisely because neither of them demanded too much from the other. No deep conversations about feelings, no arguments about priorities, no pressure to be anything other than what he already was. After Claire, this felt like relief. Claire Monroe had been different, dangerously different. She was a pediatric nurse at Northwestern Memorial, a woman who spent her days caring for sick children and her evenings volunteering at community centers on the South Side. She had no interest in his money, no patience for pretense, and an infuriating ability to see through every wall he built. They had met at a hospital fundraiser 3 years ago. She had called him out for writing a check instead of actually engaging with the cause. He had been so stunned by her audacity that he asked her to dinner on the spot. What followed was 18 months of the most intense relationship of his life. Claire had challenged him, pushed him, made him feel things he had spent decades learning to suppress. She laughed at his attempts to impress her with expensive gifts, preferring instead long walks along the lakefront and quiet dinners at her small apartment in Lincoln Park. She asked him about his childhood, his fears, his dreams, questions that made him deeply uncomfortable and strangely alive at the same time. But Claire had wanted more than he could give. She wanted a future, a family, children, and Ethan had been clear from the beginning that those things weren't part of his plan. "I don't believe in legacy through bloodlines," he had told her during one of their final arguments. "I build things that last, buildings, companies, institutions. That's my contribution to the world." "And what about love?" she had asked, tears streaming down her beautiful face. What about a family that loves you back? He hadn't had an answer, so she had walked away. Or rather, he had let her go. For months afterward, Ethan had buried himself in work. He closed 3 major acquisitions, expanded into international markets, and convinced himself that ending things with Claire had been the right decision. She deserved someone who wanted what she wanted, and he deserved peace. Natalie had provided that peace, easy, uncomplicated, safe. Now, as the Bentley merged onto Michigan Avenue, Ethan allowed himself a small smile. In 3 months, he would be married. His life would continue exactly as planned. The brief disruption that Claire had represented was firmly in the past. The traffic light ahead turned red. Ethan brought the car to a stop. And that's when everything changed. A woman stepped into the crosswalk directly in front of his car. She moved with quiet grace, her camel coat flowing gently in the breeze. Strapped to her chest was a twin carrier holding 2 sleeping infants, their tiny faces peaceful beneath matching grey hats. Ethan's heart stopped. He knew that walk. He knew those shoulders. He knew that face. Claire Monroe looked up, and for one frozen moment their eyes met through the windshield. Then she looked away and kept walking, vanishing into the crowd like a ghost. Ethan? Natalie's voice seemed to come from very far away. The light's green. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. 2 babies. Twins. The math began running through his head, and for the first time in years, Ethan Rowe felt the ground shift beneath him. The Bentley sat motionless at the green light for 3 full seconds before the car behind them laid on the horn. Ethan's foot found the gas pedal on instinct, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. It was stuck at that crosswalk, replaying the image over and over like a film loop. He couldn't pause. Claire's face, the babies, those tiny grey hats with the little ears, 2 babies, twins. Ethan, seriously, what's wrong? Natalie had lowered her phone, studying him with genuine concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. It's nothing, he managed. Just thought I recognized someone. Someone important? The question hung in the air between them. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the road, navigating through the downtown traffic with mechanical precision while his thoughts spiraled into chaos. Someone important. Claire had been more than important. She had been the only woman who ever made him question the carefully constructed life he had built. The only one who looked at his penthouse and saw loneliness instead of success. The only one who had ever made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he was missing something essential. And now she had twins. Just an old business contact, he said finally. Nothing to worry about. Natalie seemed satisfied with the answer. She returned to her phone, tapping out messages while humming softly to the jazz playing through the speakers. But Ethan's hands were trembling slightly against the steering wheel, and no amount of deep breathing could slow his racing heart. The math kept running. He and Claire had broken up 23 months ago. If those babies were around 10 or 11 months old, and they had looked about that age, then Claire would have been pregnant when they split, or very shortly after. Which meant one of 2 things. Either she had moved on immediately and gotten pregnant with someone else's children, or... No. He couldn't let himself think it, but the thought wouldn't leave him alone. He pulled into the valet lane at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse on Rush Street, one of Chicago's most iconic restaurants. The valet opened Natalie's door with practiced efficiency while Ethan sat frozen, his hands still gripping the wheel. Coming? Natalie asked, leaning back into the car. Yeah, just give me a second. She nodded and headed inside, probably assuming he needed to take a work call. Ethan watched her disappear through the heavy wooden doors, then pulled out his phone and opened his photos. He never deleted anything. It took him several minutes of scrolling to find what he was looking for. A photo from 2.5 years ago, taken at a rooftop bar overlooking Navy Pier. Claire was laughing in the image, her head thrown back, her dark skin glowing in the sunset light. She wore a simple white dress, and she looked happier than he had ever seen her. That night, she had told him she loved him. He had said it back. 3 months later, he had ended everything. Now he stared at the photo, comparing the woman in his memory to the woman he had just seen in the crosswalk. Same graceful posture, same beautiful face, same quiet strength in her eyes. But the Claire in the crosswalk had looked tired. Not defeated, never defeated, but worn in a way that suggested countless sleepless nights, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying burdens alone. 2 babies. Had she been carrying them alone since the beginning? The valet tapped on his window. Ethan startled, then stepped out of the car, pressing a $20 bill into the young man's hand without looking at him. Dinner was a blur. Natalie talked about wedding details, the florist's latest suggestions, the band she wanted to book, something about a champagne tower that her mother insisted upon. Ethan nodded at appropriate intervals, said, "That sounds perfect," whenever she paused for his input, and couldn't remember a single thing she said by the time the check arrived. His mind was locked on that crosswalk, on those baby, on the impossible possibility that refused to leave him alone. "You're not here tonight," Natalie observed over dessert, her fork poised above a slice of chocolate cake. "You've been somewhere else all evening." "I'm sorry." He reached across the table and took her hand, forcing a smile. "Work stress. There's a deal in Austin that's more complicated than expected." "You work too hard." She squeezed his fingers. "Maybe after the wedding we can take a real vacation. Somewhere with no cell service." "That sounds nice." It didn't sound nice. Nothing sounded nice except answers to the questions burning through his brain. When he dropped Natalie at her apartment that night, she kissed him longer than usual, sensing perhaps that something was off and trying to reconnect in the only way she knew how. Ethan returned the kiss mechanically, his thoughts already racing ahead to what he would do next. "See you tomorrow?" she asked. "Of course." He watched her enter the building, waited until the lobby door closed behind her, and then pulled out his phone. His contact list was extensive. Politicians, CEOs, celebrities, power brokers on 3 continents. But there was one name he was looking for tonight. A name he had used before when situations required discretion. Frank DeLuca, private investigator, former FBI, the best in Chicago. Ethan's thumb hovered over the contact for a long moment. Calling Frank meant admitting that he needed answers. It meant acknowledging that what he had seen in that crosswalk mattered enough to investigate. It meant opening a door that couldn't be closed once opened. He pressed the call button. Frank answered on the second ring. His voice gruff and familiar. "Ethan Rowe, it's been a while. I need your help. At 10 o'clock on a Friday night? Must be serious." Ethan closed his eyes. "I need you to find someone. An ex of mine. Claire Monroe. She's a nurse, probably still at Northwestern Memorial. And I need to know everything about her life for the past 2 years. A pause. Everything? Everything? This going to cause you problems?" Ethan stared out at the Chicago skyline, glittering against the night sky like a promise he no longer believed in. "It might cause me the biggest problem of my life." Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse surrounded by glass and silence, watching the city lights flicker far below while his mind raced through memories he had tried to bury. The timeline haunted him. He and Claire had ended things in early April. 2 years ago. Their final conversation had happened right here in this penthouse, in the living room with the ridiculous fireplace that Claire had always said was too big for the space. She had come over to talk. He had known what was coming. "I can't do this anymore," she had said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "I love you, Ethan, more than I've ever loved anyone. But I want a family. I want children. And you've made it very clear that's not something you'll ever want. Claire, don't." She had held up her hand. "Don't try to negotiate this like one of your business deals. This isn't about compromise. You either want a future with me or you don't. And I need an answer." He had given her one, the wrong one. "I care about you deeply," he had said. Each word calculated to cause minimum damage while still being honest. "But I can't promise you things I don't believe in. Marriage, maybe. Someday. But children? I'm not built for that kind of life." She had looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger. That might have been easier. Just with profound sadness, like she was watching something precious slip through her fingers. "Then I guess we're done," she had whispered. She had left that night, blocked his number, moved on with her life. Or so he had thought. Now, sitting in the darkness of his penthouse, Ethan counted backward on his fingers. April. They broke up in April. If Claire had been pregnant at the time, if she had found out shortly after he ended things, she would have given birth in late December or January. Those twins in the crosswalk had looked about 10 or 11 months old, maybe a year at most. The timing was too close to be coincidence, but it wasn't proof. "Come on," he muttered to himself. "Think." They had been careful. Claire had been on birth control. He had always used protection. The odds of her getting pregnant were minimal, but not zero. Never zero. A memory surfaced unbidden. Valentine's Day, that final February they were together. A weekend in Cabo San Lucas at a private villa overlooking the ocean. Too much champagne. A moonlit swim that led to the bedroom. He remembered her laughing, her skin warm against his, both of them too caught up in the moment to think about anything practical. Had they been careful that night? He couldn't remember. The uncertainty gnawed at him like acid. By the time the sun rose over Lake Michigan, casting golden light across the penthouse windows, Ethan had convinced himself of 50 different scenarios. Claire had met someone else immediately after their breakup. The timing was pure coincidence. She had wanted children so badly that she had pursued artificial insemination. The babies weren't his. They couldn't be his. Because if they were his, then everything he believed about himself was a lie. His phone rang at 8 o'clock sharp. Frank DeLuca. "That was fast," Ethan said, his voice rough from a sleepless night. "Preliminary only. I'll have the full report by Monday, but I figured you'd want to know what I found so far." "Tell me." Claire Monroe, age 34, still employed at Northwestern Memorial Pediatric Unit. Lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, same neighborhood as before, but different building. Moved there about a year and a half ago. And? Frank paused. She has twins, a boy and a girl, born January 15th last year. Ethan's chest tightened. January 15th. That's right. And here's the interesting part. No father listed on the birth certificates. She's raising them alone. The room seemed to tilt. No father listed. If Claire had been in a relationship with someone else, if these were another man's children, wouldn't that man be involved? Wouldn't he want his name on the birth certificates? Unless there was a reason Claire didn't want anyone to know who the father was. What else? Ethan managed. She's struggling financially, taking extra shifts whenever she can get them. The twins are in a daycare program subsidized by the hospital, which tells me she's not making ends meet on her own. She never reached out, never asked for help. Did you expect her to? No, he didn't. Claire had too much pride, too much dignity. She would raise those children on her own and never ask him for a single cent, even if it meant working herself into exhaustion, even if it meant denying them their father. I need more, Ethan said. I need to know for certain. A DNA test would settle it. That would require access to the children. Yes. Frank's voice was careful, professional. I'm not in the business of telling clients how to handle their personal affairs, but I'll say this. If those babies are yours and you don't do something about it, that's a choice you'll have to live with. I've seen men walk away from that kind of responsibility before. None of them seem particularly happy about it down the road. Ethan ended the call without responding. He stood at the windows again, watching the city wake up below. Joggers on the lakefront path, cars streaming along Lakeshore Drive. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that somewhere in Lincoln Park a woman was raising 2 children alone. His children. Maybe. Probably. The word settled into his chest like a stone. He had built an empire by making decisions quickly and decisively, by analyzing risks and acting without hesitation. But this wasn't a business decision. This was something far more complicated, far more dangerous, and far more terrifying than any deal he had ever closed. This was about who he was willing to become. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Rowe had no idea what to do next. The full report arrived Monday morning. Frank delivered it personally, which told Ethan everything he needed to know about its contents before he opened the folder. When private investigators made house calls, it meant the information was too sensitive for email. They sat across from each other in Ethan's home office, the Chicago skyline glittering through the windows, while Frank walked him through the details. The twins' names are Lily and James, Frank said. Born at Northwestern Memorial at 36 weeks, premature but healthy. Both spent a week in the NICU before Claire took them home. Ethan stared at the photographs spread across his desk. Hospital records, birth certificates, insurance documents, and photos, candid shots of Claire pushing a double stroller through Lincoln Park, of the twins sitting in high chairs at a cafe of a small apartment building on Armitage Avenue with flower boxes in the windows. She did this alone, Ethan said quietly. The whole pregnancy, the birth, everything. From what I can tell, yes. She has friends who help out. Other nurses from the hospital, a neighbor who babysits occasionally. But no romantic partner, no family in the area. Her parents are deceased. One sister in Atlanta who visits maybe twice a year. The isolation of it hit Ethan like a physical blow. Claire had faced pregnancy alone, delivered twins alone, spent the first year of their lives working double shifts and stretching every dollar while he had been planning destination weddings and closing billion-dollar deals. The birth certificates, he said. No father listed. That's right, but I did some digging into the medical records, don't ask how, and found something interesting. Frank slid a document across the desk. Her initial prenatal workup, dated late April of 2 years ago. Ethan looked at the date, 3 weeks after their breakup. She was already pregnant when you split, Frank said. She may not have known yet, but the conception date puts it right in the window of your relationship. The room went silent. Ethan had spent his entire career mastering the art of emotional detachment. He had sat across from business partners as they lost everything and felt nothing. He had fired executives who had served his company for decades and slept soundly that night. He had built walls so high and so thick that nothing could penetrate them. Those walls crumbled in an instant. He put his head in his hands and felt something break inside him. "She knew," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She found out she was pregnant after I ended things, and she decided not to tell me. Based on what you told her about wanting children, or not wanting them, can you blame her?" No, he couldn't. Claire had heard him declare clearly and confidently that children weren't part of his plan. That legacy was built in boardrooms, not nurseries. She had taken him at his word and made the hardest decision of her life alone, to protect herself and her children from a man who didn't want them. "There's one more thing," Frank said carefully. "I managed to get a sample. A coffee cup she threw away outside the daycare center. It's not admissible in court, but the lab I use says there's enough DNA for a comparison test." Ethan looked up. "You already ran it?" "I know you, Ethan. You would have asked me to anyway. Figured I'd save you the suspense." He slid a final document across the desk. Ethan's hands trembled as he picked it up. Medical terminology, percentages, genetic markers, and at the bottom, in clinical black text, probability of paternity, 99.97%. The paper fell from his fingers. They were his, Lily and James, his children. He had been a father for 11 months without knowing it. "What do you want to do?" Frank asked. Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. The magnitude of what he was facing had stolen every word from his vocabulary. After Frank left, Ethan sat alone in his office for hours. He didn't answer his phone when Natalie called. He didn't respond to emails from his executive team. He simply sat in the leather chair where he had built an empire and tried to comprehend how completely his life had changed in the span of 3 days. He was a father. The man who had declared children antithetical to his life plan had fathered twins. And the woman he had loved, the only woman he had ever truly loved, had raised them alone because she believed he wouldn't want them. Guilt crashed over him in waves. But beneath the guilt was something else. Something unexpected. He thought about those photos. Lily's eyes, dark and curious. James's smile, already so full of mischief. 2 perfect children he had created and abandoned without even knowing they existed. He wanted to know them. The realization struck him with the force of revelation. Despite everything he had believed about himself, despite every wall he had built, he wanted to know his children. But wanting something and deserving it were 2 very different things. He had walked away from Claire because she wanted this. He had told her, explicitly and cruelly, that he would never be the man she needed him to be. Now he had to face her and admit that everything had changed. That he had changed. Would she believe him? Would she let him anywhere near the children he had inadvertently abandoned? He didn't know, but he knew he had to try. Ethan stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked to the elevator. He gave his driver an address in Lincoln Park. It was time to face the consequences of his choices. It was time to meet his children. The building was modest, red brick, 3 stories, with a small courtyard garden visible through a wrought iron gate. Flower boxes hung from the windows, and a children's bicycle leaned against the front steps. It was everything Ethan's penthouse was not. Warm, lived in, real. He stood on the sidewalk for a full 5 minutes, watching the building like a man studying a battlefield before combat. Twice he turned to walk away. Twice he turned back. Finally, he climbed the steps and pressed the buzzer for apartment 2B. The intercom crackled. "Yes?" Claire's voice. Even through the static, It hit him like a punch to the chest. "It's Ethan." Silence. For a long moment he thought she might not answer, that she would simply refuse to engage with him, and who could blame her? He was the man who had rejected the future she wanted, appearing uninvited at her door nearly 2 years later. Then the buzzer sounded, and the door clicked open. He climbed the stairs slowly, his heart pounding harder with each step. The hallway smelled like laundry detergent and something baking. Cookies, maybe. Someone's grandmother had lived in this building. Someone's children had grown up here. His children were growing up here. Claire stood in the doorway of 2B, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She wore jeans and a simple navy sweater, her hair pulled back in the same neat bun he had seen in the crosswalk. She looked tired, beautiful, and absolutely furious. "How did you find me?" she asked. "Private investigator." "Of course." She laughed bitterly. Because showing up unannounced wasn't invasive enough. "Claire, don't." She held up her hand. "Whatever you came here to say, I'm not interested. I spent the last 2 years building a life without you, and I'm not about to let you walk in and disrupt it because you had some kind of epiphany at a traffic light." "I saw you," he said, "with the twins." "I know, I saw you too. Why didn't you tell me?" The question hung in the air between them. Claire's jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she might slam the door in his face. Instead, she spoke slowly, deliberately, like she was explaining something to a child. "You told me, explicitly, that you didn't want children. You said legacy was built in boardrooms, not nurseries. You made it very clear that a family wasn't part of your plan." Her voice cracked slightly. "So, when I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after you ended things, what exactly was I supposed to do? Call you up and beg you to change your mind? You could have told me. Why? So you could pressure me to terminate. So you could offer money to make the problem go away." She shook her head. "I knew what you wanted, Ethan, and it wasn't this. But I had a right to know. You had rights." Her voice rose. "You gave up your rights when you walked away. When you told me that what I wanted was incompatible with your precious life plan." She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "I didn't hide them from you out of spite. I did it to protect them from a father who didn't want them." A child cried inside the apartment. Claire's expression shifted instantly from anger to concern. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at him. "You need to leave. Please," he said. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "Why should I give you 5 minutes?" "Because I'm their father. And because I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Sincerity, maybe, or deception. He didn't know what she saw, but finally she stepped aside and gestured him through the door. 5 minutes. The apartment was small but immaculate. A living room with a worn couch and a coffee table covered in children's books. A kitchen with a high chair near the window. And on the floor, surrounded by toys, were 2 children. Lily and James. His children. They were smaller than he expected. More fragile. Lily had dark, curly hair and eyes that seemed too intelligent for her age. James was lighter-skinned, with a mischievous grin and a toy truck clutched in his chubby hand. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "This is Lily," Claire said quietly, watching him watch them. "And this is James." Lily looked up at the sound of her name. Her eyes met Ethan's, and she smiled. A pure, uncomplicated smile that expected nothing and offered everything. Something inside him collapsed. He sank to his knees without thinking, suddenly desperate to be at their level, to be close to them. James crawled toward him immediately, curious about the stranger. His tiny hand reached out and wrapped around Ethan's finger. The touch was electric. This was his son, his flesh and blood. A person he had helped create who was now holding on to him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan looked up at Claire. She stood by the window, arms still crossed, tears streaming silently down her face. "I can help," he said hoarsely. "Whatever you need. Money, time, support." She shook her head. "Help isn't enough." "Then what is?" "They need permanence." She met his eyes, and he saw in them the weight of every sleepless night, every solo doctor's appointment, every moment of terror and exhaustion she had faced alone. They need a father who shows up, not when it's convenient, not when you've run out of other options, every day, for the rest of their lives. He understood then. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about writing checks or hiring nannies or providing financial support. This was about who he was willing to become. And he knew in that moment exactly what he had to do. Ethan returned to the penthouse that night and didn't sleep for the second time in a week. But this sleeplessness was different. Before, his mind had raced with uncertainty, with the terrifying possibility that he might be a father. Now it raced with something else entirely, a kind of wonder he had never experienced. Lily's smile, James's grip on his finger, the way Claire had watched him with those children, guarded but hopeful, like she wanted desperately to believe he could be different. He kept seeing their faces in the darkness, kept feeling that tiny hand wrapped around his. For 39 years, Ethan had defined success in terms of acquisition. Properties acquired, companies acquired, wealth acquired. His entire identity was built around the things he could purchase and control. But these children couldn't be purchased. They couldn't be controlled. They could only be earned. And earning them would require something he had never given anyone before: his time, his presence, his willingness to show up without knowing the outcome. The next morning he called his assistant. "Clear my calendar." Marcus paused. "For how long, sir?" "Until further notice." "Sir, you have a board meeting Thursday. The Austin developers are flying in next week. The Tokyo acquisition. Handle what you can. Postpone the rest. I'll be unavailable for personal reasons." Another pause. "Is everything all right?" "No," Ethan said honestly. "But it's going to be." He drove to Lincoln Park that afternoon without calling ahead. Claire was just leaving the building with the twins, heading to the park with her double stroller. "You again," she said flatly. "I'd like to walk with you, if that's okay." She studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "It's a public park." They walked in silence for several blocks, past brownstones and coffee shops and small restaurants with outdoor seating. The twins babbled happily in their stroller, pointing at pigeons and dogs and anything else that caught their attention. "Lily's the quiet one," Claire said finally. "She watches everything, takes it all in. James is the opposite. He has to touch everything, experience everything immediately. They're so different already." "Do they sleep through the night?" Claire laughed. "Sometimes. James is better at it. Lily still wakes up at 3 a.m. sometimes, wanting to be held." "That must be exhausting." "It is." She glanced at him. "But it's also the best thing that's ever happened to me. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified, completely alone. But the moment I saw them—" She trailed off, unable to find words for it. "I want to know them," Ethan said. "Mum, I know I have no right to ask for that. I know I gave up any claim to them when I walked away from you. but I'm asking anyway." They reached the park, a small green space with a playground and a duck pond. Claire found a bench and sat down, positioning the stroller so the twins could see the water. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "More than anyone has ever hurt me. I thought we had something real, and then you just ended it. Like I was a contract you no longer wanted to renew. I was wrong. Were you?" She turned to face him fully. "Or did you just see an opportunity you don't want to miss? A ready-made family to enhance your image?" The accusation stung because he understood where it came from. "I won't pretend I was a different person 2 years ago," he said carefully. "I was exactly what you said, cold, controlled, emotionally unavailable. I ended things because you wanted more than I thought I could give, and I convinced myself that was the right decision for both of us. And now I've seen my children, and something changed." He paused, struggling to articulate feelings he had never examined before. "I don't know how to be a father. I don't know if I'll be any good at it, but I want to try. Not for my image, not for control, because they're mine, and I want to be part of their lives." Claire was silent for a long time. "You can't just show up when it's convenient," she said finally. "If you're going to be in their lives, you have to be consistent. They're too young to understand why Daddy is sometimes here and sometimes gone." "I understand. Do you?" She leaned forward. "Because being a father isn't like being a CEO. You can't delegate the hard parts. You can't reschedule when something more important comes up. You have to be present, actually present, even when you're exhausted and frustrated and you'd rather be anywhere else." "I know. And what about Natalie? What about your engagement?" The question hung in the air. Ethan had been avoiding thinking about Natalie, about the wedding, about the clean, controlled life he had been building with her. But sitting here, watching his children point at ducks with joy that required no explanation, he knew that life was over. "I'll handle it," he said. "That's not an answer. I'll end the engagement." The words came out more easily than he expected. "Tonight." Claire's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "I should have done it the moment I saw you in that crosswalk." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking for a second chance with us. I'm just asking for the opportunity to be their father, to prove that I can be what they need." Something shifted in Claire's expression. The walls she had built, necessary walls, protective walls, seemed to lower slightly. "We'll take it slow," she said. "Supervised visits, building up trust. You'll have to earn your place in their lives." "I will. And if you hurt them, if you disappear again, I will never forgive you." He nodded. "I understand." James chose that moment to throw his toy truck out of the stroller. Ethan retrieved it without thinking, wiping off the grass before handing it back. "Thank you," James said, his first word to his father. Ethan felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "You're welcome," he said softly. Ending the engagement was harder than Ethan had anticipated, not emotionally but logistically. He found Natalie at her apartment that evening, scrolling through wedding invitations on her iPad. She looked up with a smile when he walked in, completely unaware of what was coming. "Hey, you. I've narrowed it down to 3 invitation designs. Want to see?" "We need to talk." The smile faded. "That doesn't sound good." He sat down across from her, trying to find the right words. There were no right words. "I can't marry you, Natalie." Silence. "What?" "Something has happened. Something I can't explain fully, but I need you to know. This isn't about you. You've been wonderful. You're exactly what I thought I wanted. but I've discovered something that changes everything." "What could possibly—" She stopped, realization dawning. "It's her, isn't it? The woman from the crosswalk." "Yes." Natalie's face cycled through emotions, confusion, hurt, and finally, surprisingly, understanding. "I always knew you were holding something back," she said quietly. "Some part of yourself you never let me see. I convinced myself it didn't matter because everything else was so perfect. But it did matter, didn't it? I'm sorry." "Are you going back to her?" "No. At least I don't know. But there are children involved. My children. And I need to be part of their lives." The word children hit Natalie like a physical blow. She stood up, walked to the window, and stood there with her back to him. "You told me you didn't want children. I thought I didn't. So what changed? You see some random woman on the street with babies and suddenly you're father of the year? They're mine, Natalie. Twins. I had no idea they existed until 3 days ago." She turned around, tears streaming down her face. "And what am I supposed to do now? Tell everyone the wedding is off because my fiancé discovered he has a secret family? I'll handle the announcement. I'll make sure everyone knows this was my decision, my failure." "How generous of you." The conversation continued for another hour, cycling through anger and grief and negotiation. Natalie demanded answers he couldn't fully give. She accused him of leading her on, of wasting her time, of destroying her life. Every accusation was deserved. By the time he left, the engagement was officially over. The news spread quickly. By Thursday, the Chicago Tribune had the story. By Friday, it had gone national. Billionaire Ethan Rowe calls off wedding amid scandal. The speculation was relentless. Affair, financial troubles, secret addiction. Nobody guessed the truth. His board of directors called an emergency meeting. "The optics are terrible," said Charles Morrison, lead independent director. "We've lost 6% on our stock price since the story broke. Investors are nervous." "Investors are always nervous," Ethan said. "This is different. You've built your brand on reliability, consistency, and now you're in the tabloids looking like just another rich man with personal problems." "I have personal problems. That doesn't affect my ability to run this company." "It affects how people perceive your ability to run this company, which is the same thing." The meeting ended without resolution. Ethan could feel the board's confidence eroding, could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. How much longer could they support a CEO whose personal life was becoming a liability? That night, he drove to Lincoln Park again. Claire was sitting on the front steps of her building, the twins asleep upstairs. She stood when she saw his car, arms crossed in that familiar defensive posture. "I saw the news," she said. "I ended it. Like I said I would." "You didn't have to do that for me." "I didn't do it for you." He walked up the steps and stopped a few feet away. "I did it for them, and for myself." She studied his face in the lamplight. "You look tired." "I haven't slept much this week." "Welcome to parenthood." The words were dry, but there was warmth beneath them, a crack in the wall. "The board is losing faith in me," he said. "The wedding cancellation is creating problems I didn't anticipate." "Are you having second thoughts?" "No." The answer came immediately, without hesitation. "But I want you to understand what I'm giving up. Not because I want credit for it, but because I need you to know this is real. This isn't a phase or a whim. I'm choosing this life, even though it's costing me everything I thought I wanted." Claire was quiet for a long moment. "I don't need you to sacrifice your career," she said finally. The children need stability, not martyrdom. I'm not being a martyr. I'm being realistic. My company, my reputation, my social circle, none of it means anything compared to them. You've known them for 3 days. I know. He ran a hand through his hair. It doesn't make sense. I spent 39 years building walls against exactly this kind of vulnerability, and then one tiny hand wrapped around my finger, and all of it collapsed. For the first time since he had reappeared in her life, Claire smiled. They have that effect on people. Can I see them tomorrow? I want to take them to the Lincoln Park Zoo, if you'll come with us. A family outing? A supervised visit, whatever you want to call it. She considered for a moment, then nodded. 10 o'clock. Don't be late. I won't. He meant it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. The Lincoln Park Zoo was crowded on Saturday mornings. Families streamed through the gates, children clutching maps and pointing at animal exhibits, parents juggling strollers and snack bags. Ethan felt profoundly out of place. He had arrived at 9:45, carrying a bag from Nordstrom containing matching lion-themed outfits for the twins that had cost more than most people's car payments. Claire had laughed when she saw them. They're going to spit up on those within an hour. I don't care. They walked through the zoo slowly, stopping at each exhibit while the twins babbled with excitement. James was fascinated by the gorillas. Lily preferred the polar bears. Every few minutes, one of them would point at something and make sounds of amazement, and Ethan would feel that strange warmth spreading through his chest again. You're good with them, Claire admitted, as they sat on a bench near the seal pool. I didn't expect that. Neither did I. What made you change your mind? About children, I mean. You were so certain before. He thought about the question for a long time before answering. I think I was afraid, he said finally. My father was absent. My mother was overwhelmed. I grew up believing that family was a burden you carried, not a gift you received, and I built my entire life around avoiding that burden. What changed? I saw them. He looked at Lily, who was watching the seals with solemn intensity. I saw them, and I realized that everything I believed was wrong. They're not burdens. They're possibilities. Little people who exist because of choices I made, who will grow up and become whoever they become. And I have the chance to shape that, to be part of their story. That's terrifying, Claire said. Yes. And wonderful. Yes. She reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. The touch lasted only a second, but it felt like a bridge being built. I sold the penthouse, Ethan said. Claire turned to look at him. What? Yesterday. Listed it last week. Sold it for $12 million. I'm looking for a house in Lincoln Park. Something with a yard, room for them to grow. Ethan, you don't have to. I want to be close. I want to be able to walk over when James has a nightmare, or Lily needs someone to read to her. I want to be present. Actually present. She was silent for a long moment. What about your company? I'm stepping back, taking a less active role. I've promoted 2 of my VPs to co-CEOs and restructured the board to reduce my daily involvement. You're giving up control? I'm choosing different priorities. He met her eyes. You told me they needed permanence. This is what permanence looks like. A tear slipped down Claire's cheek. She wiped it away quickly. I spent 2 years convincing myself I was better off without you, she said, that the children were better off without a father who didn't want them. And now you're here, doing everything I never thought you would do, and I don't know how to process it. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. James chose that moment to reach for Ethan, his small arms stretched out in the universal gesture of wanting to be held. Ethan lifted him without thinking, settling the boy against his chest. "Dada," James said. Ethan's breath caught. "He's been saying that for weeks," Claire said quickly. "It doesn't mean—" "I know." But his voice was thick with emotion. "It doesn't matter what he means. What matters is that I'm here to hear it." The three of them sat there as the morning crowd swirled around them, a broken family slowly piecing itself back together. That night, Ethan made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week ago. He withdrew his nomination from the Forbes list of America's most powerful CEOs. He declined an invitation to speak at Davos. He cancelled a trip to Tokyo that would have secured a $100 million partnership. Instead, he drove to Claire's apartment and asked if he could put the twins to bed. She watched from the doorway as he read them "Goodnight Moon" 3 times, because James kept pointing at the pictures and demanding more. She watched as he settled them into their cribs, one hand on each tiny back, humming a lullaby he didn't remember learning. When he finally stepped into the hallway, exhausted and exhilarated, Claire was crying. "I never thought I'd see this," she whispered. "Neither did I. I'm still scared. So am I. But I'm willing to try, if you are." He took her hand. "I'm willing to try anything." 6 months later, Ethan Rowe stood in the backyard of his new home on Burling Street, a 4-bedroom Victorian with a wraparound porch and a garden Claire had helped him plant. The twins were taking their first steps. James had figured it out last week, tottering from the couch to Ethan's waiting arms with an expression of fierce determination. Lily had held back, observing her brother's technique, before finally attempting her own journey today. She stood now between Claire and Ethan, tiny hands gripping their fingers, gathering courage. "You can do it," Claire said softly. "We've got you." Lily let go. 1 step. 2 steps. 3. She wobbled, nearly fell, and then found her balance. Her face broke into a smile of pure triumph. Ethan scooped her up and spun her around, laughing. This was not the life he had planned. His company had continued to perform well under the new leadership structure, but he was no longer the face of it. The media had moved on to other scandals. His former social circle had quietly reclassified him from eligible billionaire to that guy who gave it all up for a woman. He didn't care. The life he had now was infinitely richer than the life he had lost. He and Claire weren't together. Not officially, not yet. They were co-parents, friends, partners in the endless project of raising 2 human beings. But there were moments, glances across the kitchen table, accidental touches that lasted a beat too long, late-night conversations that ventured into territory neither of them had intended to explore, that suggested something more was possible. They were building trust, slowly, carefully, without rushing. "I have something for you," Ethan said that evening, after the twins were asleep and the house had settled into quiet. Claire looked up from her book. She had started spending occasional nights in the guest room, ostensibly to help with the children, though they both knew it was about more than that. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a document, formal, legal, covered in signatures and notarizations. "What is this?" "A trust, for the twins. Everything I have. The company shares, the real estate, the investments, it all goes to them now. Managed by a board of trustees until they're 30, with provisions for education, health care, whatever they need." Claire's eyes widened. "Ethan, this is worth—" "I know what it's worth, and I want them to have it. Not because money matters more than anything else, but because it means security. It means they'll never have to struggle the way you struggled when I wasn't there." She set the document down and looked at him. "You've changed." "Yes. I didn't think people could really change. Not fundamentally. Neither did I." He sat down beside her. I spent 39 years believing that I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. And then 2 tiny people showed me how wrong I could be. What do you want now? The question hung between them. This, he said simply. This life. These children. This house that smells like crayons and baby powder. Saturday mornings at the zoo. Bedtime stories that have to be read 3 times. All of it. And me? You. He reached for her hand. When you're ready. If you're ever ready. I know I don't deserve a second chance. I know I gave that up when I walked away. But if you ever decide to give me one anyway, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I won't waste it. Claire was quiet for a long moment. I used to dream about this, she said finally. Back when we were together. I used to imagine you saying exactly these kinds of things. And then I would wake up and remember that you weren't capable of them. I wasn't. Not then. What made the difference? He thought about it. Them, he said. James grabbing my finger like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lily smiling at me before she had any reason to. They trusted me before I earned it. And I realized that trust was the most valuable thing anyone had ever given me. Claire's eyes were bright with tears. I'm still scared, she admitted. I built walls too, you know. After you left, I had to. For them. For me. I know. But I think... She paused, struggling with the words. I think I'm ready to try letting them down. The walls. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. We'll take it slow. Promise? Promise. Outside, the Chicago night settled over their street. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. A dog barked. The city hummed with its usual restless energy. But inside this house, in this room, everything was quiet. Ethan Rowe had spent his life building empires of glass and steel. He had amassed fortunes that most people couldn't comprehend. He had controlled markets and shaped skylines and bent the world to his will. None of it compared to this moment, sitting beside the woman he loved, in a house that smelled like home, while their children slept peacefully upstairs. This was his legacy now. Not buildings that would someday crumble, not wealth that would eventually dissipate, not power that would inevitably fade, but 2 small people who would carry his name forward, who would grow up knowing they were wanted, who would learn what it meant to be loved without condition, without limit, without end. For the first time in his life, Ethan Rowe understood what mattered, and he wouldn't waste another day forgetting it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 in the comments, and let us know what you felt along the way. Follow Secrets Narrated so you don't miss our next story. Until then, take care of the people who matter most. You never know when a crosswalk might change everything.